Hello everyone, welcome to our Egyptian online seminar group. First, you can off. Then if you have any questions, you can ask our speaker during his presentation or after his presentation. I have great pleasure of welcoming dear Professor Matthew Kubic. Matthew is an assistant professor in accounting at the University of Texas at Austin. Matt did a 1 year rotations at the FASB, primarily focusing on accounting for financial instruments. Mass research primarily centers on the U.S. Security and Exchange Commissions and financial misreporting. His work has been published into ranking journals, including the Accounting Review, the Journal of Accounting Research, the Journal of Accounting and Economics, and the Journal of Financial Reporting. Now we will start our seminar with the Professor Mass.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, and I really appreciate the invitation to present. And to all those who are joined, thank you for taking the time to join. I look forward to any feedback that you might have throughout the presentation. And as mentioned, you should feel free to jump in at any point, unmute yourself if you have a question. I'm happy to have this as a bit more of a conversation. I think that's helpful for both you and me. So the title of the paper is the SEC Reorganization, and it's a good time to present it because this paper just turned about 1 year old. So this was Nathan Herman, who's a PhD student here at UT Austin. This was his second year paper. And so he started working on it about this time last summer, worked on it throughout the summer. Then Sarah and I joined the project, and we've been working on it since then. So right about the 1 year mark. So we certainly look forward to any feedback that you might have. Also, to the extent that anything is interesting or you want some more of the details, and I'll try to get into a fair amount of details throughout this presentation, but if you'd like more details or something I say is unclear, you'd like to look at the printed version, you can find a copy on SSRN. So it's called the SEC Reorganization. I think it was posted April 4th. So once again, relatively recently, but you should be able to find it there and use it. And so with that, I'll go ahead and get started. There we go. So we'll start with, what do I mean by the SEC reorganization? So here at UT Austin, when I tell people I'm working on the SEC or SEC reorganizations, they get very, very excited. But when I say an SEC reorganization, what I think they mean, or what they think I mean, is the University of Texas joining the Southeastern Conference in football, which excites people a lot here. So they just announced they're going to have a big event, a big party celebrating the SEC. I thought they were celebrating my research. No, they're celebrating the football team joining the Southeastern Conference. There, of course, is a different type of SEC reorganization, which is the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission reorganizing the staff in their division of enforcement. And that's the nature of the SEC reorganization that I'm going to focus on in this presentation. And so before I get into the technical details of what we're doing in this paper, I thought I'd provide a little bit of background. So the Securities and Exchange Commission was created in 1934. Here you'll see a picture of FDR actually signing the act to create the Securities and Exchange Commission in response to the Great Depression. So prior to this, there was no federal securities regulator. You had state-by-state blue sky laws, but there was no federal oversight. And some people pointed to this as a problem that led to the Great Depression. And originally, enforcement was simply carried out by the regional directors. That is, there were these laws, but there was no centralized body within the SEC that was tasked with enforcing these laws. So you had different regions throughout the United States, and they might enforce very similar laws quite differently depending on whatever their perspectives were. In 1972, the SEC created the Division of Enforcement. So here you'll see a picture of William Casey. He was the director at the time, and he created the Division of Enforcement. And since its creation, it's become the SEC's most visible, perhaps you would say most important, largest division. So if you were to look at SEC annual reports to Congress, most of what they discuss is Division of Enforcement activities, so enforcement actions taken against various parties. If you were to also look at budgets, dollars, so where do they go? A lot of the money goes to the Division of Enforcement, so it would be the largest by staff and by dollars. And what the Division of Enforcement does, which is pretty straightforward, is they investigate and prosecute violations of federal securities laws. And they do this both in Washington, D.C., i.e. at the headquarters, and also in 11 different regional offices throughout the United States. On January 13th, 2010, partially in response to the most recent financial crisis, the SEC announced the creation of 5 specialized units. So essentially what they said was the Division of Enforcement used to be all about geography. It was a geography-oriented division. Now what we're going to do is we're going to follow what some banks do or what some different businesses do and create a matrix reporting structure. That is, people will no longer specialize just purely by geography. They will have product lines or areas of expertise. And so they enacted this reorganization, which was the most significant change to the organization since its establishment in 1972. So what are we doing in this paper? So here we are looking at the consequences of the 2010 reorganization on SEC enforcement. On the right-hand side, you'll see a picture of Robert Kuzmazi, who was introduced as the head of the Division of Enforcement. And once he joined in, say, March of 2009, the Division of Enforcement, reorganizing it, was one of his key priorities. So he joined from Deutsche Bank. And essentially what he said was the way we view things at Deutsche Bank is not just by geography. Sure, you might be in the US, or you might be in London, you might be in New York or in Texas, but they also viewed it by product line. That is, you might be fixed income, you might be equities, you might be derivatives. And he thought, well, why doesn't the SEC do the same thing? That is, sure, you're located in Fort Worth, Texas, or you're located in San Francisco, but you could also have a product line or area of expertise. Maybe you're an expert on insider trading, or maybe you're an expert on accounting issues, or maybe you're an expert on market manipulation. And so that was the impetus for the reorganization. The motivation, I think, is pretty straightforward. So this is going to be the most significant change to the Division of Enforcement since its establishment in 1972. And at the time the organization was put in place, Robert Kuzmazi admitted he was unclear on the effects that it would have. And so we're trying to essentially determine what were the effects of this reorganization. Now, what is our research design? So our research design here is going to be a little bit tricky. So we have a single organization, the Securities and Exchange Commission, that's going to have a change. Regressions don't work particularly well when you just have one firm or one observation. But what we're going to do is we're going to leverage the fact that there's lots of different violations that the SEC looks into. So here you can see some different violation types: insider trading, investment advisors, issuer reporting, which you could think of as accounting and enforcement releases or accounting issues. So we have all these different violation types, and we have these different offices. So we have the 11 offices plus the headquarters. And what happened is in certain areas, so for example, Denver insider trading, they created a specialized unit. But in other areas, for example, in Fort Worth, they don't have any people who are assigned to the insider trading specialized unit, which creates a possible comparison group. And then there's also certain types of topics or certain violations, such as issue reporting, for which there was no specialized unit, there was no SU, and thus you can also use those as a comparison point. So essentially what we can do in our design is we can compare insider trading pre-post the reorganization in Denver compared to Fort Worth, one type of comparison, or we can compare it insider trading in Denver to say issue reporting in Denver, where insider trading in Denver had a specialized unit, but issuer reporting did not. And with that, I'll pause for a second. I think I see one chat in the window. Okay, it's just a link to the paper. So I'll give everyone a second if there's any questions, and then I'll take a step forward. All right, so let me go back here. So pre-reorganization, what did the SEC look like? So here's a map that some people might be familiar with that shows both the SEC headquarters, so that's in red with the star there in Washington, D.C., and then also the 11 different regional offices, which are in San Francisco, LA, Denver, Salt Lake, Fort Worth, Boston, Philly, etc. And prior to the reorganization, everyone was a generalist. So if you were in Fort Worth or San Francisco or Boston, you were expected to be able to work on all different violation types. That is, you should be familiar with accounting issues, you should be familiar with insider trading, you should be familiar with investment companies, you should be familiar with public finance. What the reorganization did was it essentially took some of these people, about 225 people, or about 20% of their investigative staff, and it assigned them to specialized units. So you could think about orange perhaps as insider trading. And so we say, okay, some people in Boston are now going to focus just on insider trading. Some people in Philly are going to focus just on insider trading. And then maybe blue is public finance. We'll say, okay, well, some people in Chicago, you're now in the public finance specialized unit. But still, within each region, about 75% of people were not specialized. That is, they continued to remain generalist and focus on all different topics, whether it be a specialized topic or not. And so we're going to examine this SEC reorganization. And we think there's some tension here on whether there's going to be benefits or cost. So if you think through potential benefits, you can have enhanced training for specialized unit staff by focusing on a specific area or specific topic. This is why a lot of large banks, a lot of large accounting firms, a lot of consulting firms have some degree of specialization where it's not just your geographic area that you're focused on, but you also have some area of expertise within that. So when I was at PwC, I was within transaction services in the Dallas group, but I focused on complex accounting issues and also failed bank acquisitions. And by focusing on a certain specific area, that allowed for enhanced training, development of skills, development of more concentrated skills that in theory could yield some benefits. It might also improve the SEC's ability to recruit and retain subject matter experts. Suppose you're working at a large law firm and your area of expertise is public finance or insider trading. You might have interest in going to work for the SEC to further develop your skills, or perhaps you're interested in doing public service. But if you go to the SEC, you're probably going to want to work on things where you had some relative expertise before. That is, you might want to continue to do insider trading. And prior to the reorganization, that necessarily wouldn't be the case. You could go to the SEC, but you might have to work across all of the different areas because you would be a generalist. Once we now have these specialized units, to the extent that you can get hired into one, or you have at least a career path which could put you in one day, it might help you. And finally, another potential benefit is it's easier to identify knowledge experts. So in the pre-reorganization period, imagine you're sitting in San Francisco and you have an accounting issue or you have an insider trading issue. You might not know who the experts are across the United States. That is, everyone's a generalist. So if you have an issue related to insider trading, there's no way to find who are the insider trader experts. Now, post-reorganization, so starting in 2011, once the reorganization was in place, there's about 50 people across the United States who are designated as experts in insider trading. So you know who they are. They're available in your internal directory. You can look them up. You can call them. You can ask them questions. And presumably, this made it easier for other staff to identify knowledge experts and to ask them relevant questions. And so for all these reasons, you can see potential benefits of the reorganization. We also think there could be potential cost. First is there's a new matrix reporting structure. And so there's a large literature in management which looks at the implementation of matrix reporting structures. Do they yield benefits or not? Are they successful or not? And one of the challenges with the matrix reporting structure is now, as a staff, you have two different bosses and it's unclear who exactly you report to. That is, suppose you're assigned to the insider trading specialized unit and you're in Fort Worth, Texas, but the head of the insider trading specialized unit is in Philadelphia. Well, now you have a Fort Worth regional office director that you report to, but you also report to the head of insider trading. Whose priorities should you focus on? Who do you report to most directly? So this matrix reporting structure and private practice has led to a lot of issues over time. There's also substantial implementation risk and the potential fear that would create a two-tiered system. And so I have a quote from Robert Kuzmazi where he said, "You don't want to create a two-tiered system where somehow specialized units were viewed as where the real action was and the best cases were assigned, because then other people might rationally ignore that." So you can imagine you're working for a university and the university says, you know what, we want to create some large language model ChatGPT researchers, and these 4 people are those researchers. And they are assigned to this new specialized unit and they get first crack at all the best projects. Well, what is the rest of the staff, pardon me, at that university going to do? They might rationally look at that and think, well, wait a second. If there's a specialized unit to focus on these topic areas and I'm not assigned to it, I might just ignore that area from now on because I'm unlikely to get the best possible research ideas, the best possible projects. I'm going to get the leftover cases. And so the SEC was very concerned about that. After all, there's 6 different areas, 5 different specialized units, 25% of staff. So that means about 5% of staff are going to be specialized in any given topic. The rest of the staff, so the 75% who aren't specialized, they still need to work on those topics to allocate some time to those topics to still have the same total amount of effort allocated. And if they decide that's not in their best interest, if they decide to shunt those topics, you could actually have a negative effect. Finally, the third potential cost is what I'll call what works for Wall Street might not work for the SEC. So you often hear a lot of discussion of perhaps what we should do is we should take things that work in the private sector and implement them in the public sector. But that doesn't always work out well. So there does seem to be quite a large divergence between the two. And so I don't think it's obvious that taking something that worked at Deutsche Bank or taking Deutsche Bank's organizational structure, which was essentially what Robert Kuzmasi wanted to do, and implementing it at the SEC is going to be a slam dunk, an obvious success. I would also say that there's pretty strong tension here because from 1972 to 2010, the SEC decided not to implement specialized units. So for 38 years, they didn't think this was a good idea. Presumably there was some reason, some rationale for that. I'll pause for a second, see if anyone has any questions before I move on. Finally, we also think that there's a chance that there could be no change. So perhaps this is just window dressing. So here's a little cartoon. It's all agreed that we'll pursue radical change as long as it doesn't impact any current practices or policies. And so I think this is a common critique of some type of organizational changes, which is they are a change in labels, but without a change in substance. For those who focus on IFRS adoption, you've seen some research papers in this area that have done this with IFRS adoption. That is, perhaps when you have IFRS adoption, you have certain people who are real adopters and other people who are label adopters. So it's a change in name, not a change in substance. And you could perhaps have the same thing here. And even Robert Kuzmasi, the director of enforcement, said the same thing. He said, I didn't know how this was going to play out. So I didn't want to start out by specializing 50% of staff. About 25% of staff ended up being specialized because they thought that was an appropriate level. But certainly it was not clear whether or not this would yield benefits or not. So what is our research design? So our research design is going to be as follows. We have all of these people who here you can see on the top left across the United States in the different offices. Some of them will be specialized and some of them won't. They created 5 specialized units, which relate to 6 different enforcement topics. So you have FCPA, which is Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. You have the Market Abuse Unit, which relates to both insider trading and market manipulation. You have the Asset Management Unit, which focused on investment advisors. You had the Public Finance Unit, which focused on municipalities, and Structured Products, which generally focused on securities offerings. I will acknowledge there is some overlaps. You could certainly have some specialized units which relate to possible different enforcement topics, but this is the primary topic they relate to. Finally, for 2 enforcement topics, for broker-dealers and for issuer reporting or accounting issues, there was no specialized unit. So what this gives us is 8 different topics, and we have 12 different offices. So we have the headquarters, the 11 regional offices, and we're going to take 5 years before the reorganization, 5 years after the reorganization, which gives us a total of 10 years. So we have 10 years, 8 topics, 12 offices. The office topic year level will be our unit of observation, yielding us 960 observations. Our main design is going to look at enforcement as the outcome variable, measure at the office topic year level, times, and our main coefficient of interest will be beta 1, which is specialized times post in a standard diff and diff design, where we look at the areas that had a creation of a specialized unit in the post period compared to areas that didn't have a specialized unit in the post period. And that'll be the general design using a number of different fixed effects. How do we measure enforcement? We're going to use 2 different measures of enforcement. And on the next screen, I'll map those into the enforcement process. Those will be investigations opened. So there's a recent data set that a lot of people have been using. Perhaps some of you are familiar with it. Looking at investigation openings available through FOIA data. So Terrence Blackburn, Dan Taylor, Eric Holzman have been pretty active in this area. They have several papers, so we're going to leverage that data. to measure investigations opened. And then we're also going to look at civil actions that are actually filed. So when that investigation actually turns into an enforcement action. Investigations opened and civil actions are both count data. Since they are count data, we're going to use Poisson regressions, although results are very similar if we use, the standard log plus one. Although recent research in finance, so there's a paper in JFE saying that when you have this type of count data, it's best used to Poisson regressions, and so that's what we're going to do. So, and I see a question in the chat, which I'll briefly go over to. And so the question is, can an enforcement action have more than one topic or be pursued by more than one specialized unit? So that's a very good question. The short answer is yes, something can be pursued by more than one specialized unit. And each enforcement action, in theory, can relate to multiple different topics. It could relate to multiple different topics. But what the SEC does, so in the SEC's annual report, they will list out every single enforcement action and the topic they think it most relates to. So if you were to look through the SEC's annual report, or the Division of Enforcement since 2017 actually publishes their own annual report, they'll say something like each enforcement action can relate to more than one area, but it does have a primary area, and they'll provide a detailed breakdown of every single enforcement action that is filed during a year and the topic that they map it to. And we're going to use the SEC's own topic mapping. And I'll actually show you here in a second exactly how we get the topic that everything relates to. It will come directly from the SEC's annual reports. So I think a good question. And I will touch on that question, like I said, a bit more here in 2 slides. And so with that, so measuring enforcement, if you think about the SEC's enforcement process, there is a triggering event which can lead to a matter under inquiry or a MUI, although that doesn't always have to be the case. And then from there, the SEC will open an investigation. That's going to be our first outcome measure. The investigation will either go somewhere, that is, it leads to an enforcement action, which is filed in federal court, or in an administrative proceeding, where an administrative proceeding is a filing in the SEC's own administrative court, or it won't lead to an enforcement action, in which case the investigation is closed. And I see we also have a question. Please feel free to jump in.
Yeah. Hi, Matt. So I wanted to ask earlier because I had some technical issues. So it's a very early question. So I wonder, when you mentioned the headquarters and other offices, is it only apply for the enforcement division, or is it also applied to division of corporation finance?
That's a good question. So just going back, if you were to look at the map at the top left-hand corner here, you will see the SEC headquarters and also all of these different regional offices. The Division of Enforcement and certain other divisions, but not the Division of Corporation Finance, do have people in all of the regional offices. So there's OC, which is the Office of Compliance and Inspections. It was created 20 years ago or something. I believe they have some regional staff. So the people who do the examination program have some regional staff. But other groups, so Division of Corporation Finance, which I believe is the 3rd largest group in the SEC, all of their people are in Washington, D.C. So if you actually look, you can see through FOIA data where people are assigned, and all people who work in the Division of Corporation Finance who provide these comment letters, they're all in Washington, D.C., except for maybe one, which is probably just a data area. But yeah, they're all in Washington, D.C. The enforcement staff are throughout the United States.
Oh, I see. Yeah, thank you for the information, because I want to know whether all the people from the Division of Corporate Finance, they're all in D.C.
Yeah, so Division of Corporate Finance will be organized differently, and all of their staff will be located in D.C. Yep.
But they assign common letter based on industry office. So I wonder, but that doesn't has nothing to do with the geographic area.
Yep. So they assign everything by industry, not by geography. Whereas the Division of Enforcement, historically, especially prior to 2010, was very geography focused. That is, so we have some anecdotes in the paper. Enron happens. Enron ends up being assigned to the Fort Worth office, because here you can see on the map, Fort Worth is the closest to Houston. So they end up being assigned to that because they're the closest and it's in their geography. You can think about another way of doing that, which is Enron has issues with special purpose vehicles, SPEs, whatever you want to call them, VIEs under the new guidance. Another way to do that is to say, okay, well, here's the nature of what the issue is. Perhaps we should have subject matter experts who then investigate based on the subject matter expertise. I would say this is actually probably more similar to how the large accounting firms are organized. So if you have an accounting issue, most accounting firms will actually refer you to the national office, where the national office has subject matter expertise. They don't just assign you to the most local office. So I would say it's a pretty significant shift in that regard.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Great question, of course. And so here again is the enforcement process. And so once again, we're going to investigations opened and then also cases filed in federal court. You'll see here in a second why we focus on cases filed in federal court. The main advantage is a filing in federal court list the SEC attorneys who are responsible for it, and thus we know their geography. So this gets back to the earlier question of how do we know which topic each case filing relates to? So here's an example of an annual report from 2009. And here you can see the SEC is showing all of the primary classifications for the cases. So they're saying primary classification is issue reporting, broker-dealer, investment advisor, security offering. That is, the SEC says this is the primary classification for this case. It could tangentially relate to other areas, but here's how the SEC wants to classify it. And you see the number of civil actions or administrative proceedings, along with the number of total cases and the percent of total actions that relate to it. If you were to actually click on each of these topics, the SEC will provide a detailed listing for all 68 civil actions and 75 administrative proceedings related to issue reporting on what the name of the case is. So we get all of these case names directly from the annual report. Then we have essentially a computer script, a textual script that's going to go to the SEC website. It's going to scrape all of the different actual filings, and we're going to link these two data sets together. So we can see all the civil actions filed for each area. Our computer script goes in, it actually finds the actual filing. So here's a filing against Home Depot. And what it's going to do is it's going to pull a whole bunch of information from the filing itself. And here in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that this case against Office Depot is going to be related to the Miami office. So you can see attorneys for the plaintiff, which is the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, are located at 801 Brickell Avenue, Miami, Florida. So we know this case relates to the Miami office. We also know it relates to issue reporting because once again, in the SEC's own annual report, they say the case labeled SEC versus Office Depot, which has the release number AAER 3199, relates to issue reporting. So we're going to take the SEC's classification as our classification. So that's going to be how we map everything. And the next thing that we need to measure, so that's how we measure enforcement, is we need to measure specialization. So how do we go about doing or measuring specialization? What we're going to do is we submitted a FOIA request. And the FOIA request said essentially, please give us the names of everyone who works in the SEC Division of Enforcement and the unit they are assigned to. And these people, so there's a couple thousand people, they end up being assigned to 800 or so different units. One of the nice things is a lot of the units, well, the units that are specialized units, say something like FCPA-specialized unit, or specialized unit on insider trading, or specialized unit on market abuse, market manipulation. So we go through all of these 800 different units, and we say, okay, here are the ones, or here are the people that appear to be associated with a specialized unit. In that FOIA data, we also know their office. So we know their office they worked in, if they're assigned to a specialized unit, and which specialized unit it is. To validate this data, we go back to the SEC's own press release. And the SEC says something like, depending on how you measure staff, so do you include like admin support staff or not, 20-25% of people are assigned to specialized unit, which is essentially what we get in our data as well. So at an aggregate level, we reconcile very well, which gives us a lot of comfort that we're able to accurately identify specialized units. And what we'll see is that across different areas, you have different degrees of specialization. So let's take securities offering as an illustrative example. you could have securities offering in Atlanta or Boston. In Boston, 2.3% of staff are assigned to securities offering specialized unit. In Atlanta, it's 8.8%. So Atlanta will have more specialization in securities offering than Boston. Some offices might have 0%. And both of them will have more specialized units or specialization than issue reporting, which doesn't have any specialization in any office. So again, we'll use issue reporting and broker-dealers as our benchmark topics. We use essentially two different measures of treatment. So first is we let specialized be a continuous variable. So if you have 3% specialized, it takes the value 3%. If you have 10% specialized, it takes the value 10%. And the second thing we'll do is we'll do an above, below, medium split, because there's not necessarily a reason, or you might posit that our effects might not be linear. So to the extent that they're not linear, you wouldn't want to force a linear form on it. And so we'll also do median split, so above, below, median. And yes, I see another question. Please feel free.
Yeah, Matt, so when you talk about the assign topic, so I'm just curious. So the SEC, when they assign like staff to this unit, like do they consider their specialty, their prior work experience? Like just general question, how do you know, like how do they assign
That is
staff?
an excellent question. It's almost leading me right into my next slide. I think it's my next slide, so I'll go ahead and use that as an impetus to go forward a slide or two. I'll show you what the specialized units look like across different geographies, and then I'll answer your question. It's actually 2 slides from now, perhaps, but very close.
Okay, we'll wait.
So here's what specialized units look like across areas. So I realize this is hard to see in just a graph. Here we also have it visually. What you'll see is of the different specialized units, so here's all 5, they have different degrees of specialization. So the gray areas would be no specialization. So there are certainly areas for all the different units where there's no specialization. Then there's areas that have a light degree of specialization, so the light yellow. And then there's areas that have a pretty heavy degree of specialization, so those will be the darker red. So there's certainly geography, differences in geography across the US on where these specialized units are created or not. Getting to the question of how are they created or how are they assigned? So one of the things we want to know was, what are the determinants of SU assignment? That is, who gets assigned, who does not get assigned. So what we see is there's a greater likelihood of assignment for lawyers. In fact, everyone who's assigned to a specialized unit is a lawyer. The Division of Enforcement has both lawyers and accountants. No accountants were assigned to specialized units. It was just lawyers. We find you're less likely to be assigned if you're a new hire, although it's not true that just the very, very senior people, so the people with the most tenure, were assigned. So it's something like mid-career people. So new hires weren't assigned, but super long tenure people weren't assigned. It's somewhere in between. We find that it doesn't matter if you went to a top 20 law school or not. It does seem to be the people that are in the middle of the pay grade range. So they tend to be higher pay grade. Once again, not the highest pay grade, but not the lowest. They're towards the higher end of the pay grade spectrum. We also tried to look at expertise. And what we found was it doesn't really seem to be that correlated with expertise. Now, it's difficult to know exactly what everyone's expertise was in the pre-period. We could see what law school they went to. But what the other thing we could do is we could see, okay, each of these different offices. So if you're in Boston or Philly or Chicago or San Francisco, what did your office focus on mostly in the pre-reorganization period? So you're in San Francisco. Is all San Francisco focusing on insider trading? And if so, does San Francisco then get the most insider trading staff? We actually don't find any evidence of that. So it doesn't seem to be the nature of what the offices were doing beforehand, i.e. a pure relabeling effect. But what is the strongest driver, which is perhaps not that surprising, is where the unit chiefs or heads, the specialized unit heads, are located. So the way the reorganization was implemented was Robert Kuzmazi said we are going to reorganize into these 5 different specialized units, and he picked the leaders for each of those specialized units. Where the unit chiefs were located, they tended to pick staff in their geographic area. So that certainly seems to be the nature of what the assignment is, which I think gets at your question. And then I think I also saw a question in the chat, which is there any evidence on the extent to which officers change location post-reorganization? So we do have every single person and where they're located. We have not checked to see if, say, someone was assigned to be the leader of a specialized unit and then changed offices or not. But that is certainly something that we can and should check. So that's a good recommendation. I appreciate that. And with that, get into sample selection. So we have here you can see, for those who are interested in doing this type of research, the number of investigations. The main reason we drop some investigations is because they're not related to our sample period, and most enforcement actions will remain in our sample other than a handful where we are unable to identify the complaint. So this results in 6,000 investigations and 1,800 civil cases. And we'll see variation across topics. And this is going to motivate the use of topic fixed effects. So when we get into our regression, we'll have office topic fixed effects. And that's because there is a fair degree of variation across offices and topics. Univariate, what do we see? So if we were to just take areas with specialized units and split them into high specialized units, low specialized units, or benchmark groups without specialized units, what we see univariately for investigation openings makes a lot of sense. So we see high specialized units have about a 32% increase in investigation openings. Low specialized units have about a 13% increase. And benchmark topics have a decrease of about 21%. So it does seem to be that there's a shift away from these benchmark topics towards specialized topics, and that this is the largest for the areas with the most specialized or highest degree of specialized staff. In a regression framework, where here the first two columns are using indicator variables for above and below medium, and the far right columns are using the percent specialized staff, what we see is a positive coefficient on post-time specialized, which indicates that as there's more specialization, there ends up being more investigation openings in these areas. Across all columns, we have office, topic, and year fixed effects. And so essentially the variation is coming similar to what I showed earlier, controlling for all the fixed effects for each of those. And we find that results are robust to numerous different specifications, such as dropping various offices. If we were to try to interpret economic magnitude, it would show that a 3 to 4% increase in investigations for every 1% increase in SU staff. So it's not just a one-for-one substitution. So it's not like you assign 1% more people and you get a 1% increase in investigations. It's about a 3 to 4 times magnitude. So you assign one person and you get 3 more cases. You assign 2 people, you get 6 more cases, something like that. I see a question.
Hi, Mike. Just a clarification question. So here the dependent variable is the investigation. So does it include all kinds of investigation initiated by the SEC, or it only includes investigations finally settled at the federal court?
Good question. So in this one, it's going to include all investigations that are opened. So we're going to measure investigation openings, and this will be all investigations that are opened, regardless of whether or not they result in an enforcement action. And so what we'll say here is that there's an increase in investigation openings, but I think where your questioning is getting is investigation openings in and of themselves aren't necessarily a good thing. It's like starting a new project. Starting a new project is only a good thing if that project actually turns into a paper that eventually turns into something that gets published. Starting a project that goes nowhere, you might say not so great. And so I think the same thing true is here, which is going to motivate us looking at case filings later on. So here we'll have all investigations that are opened. We are currently in the process of trying to do some analysis with investigations to determine what are the nature of these investigations. With case filings, we capture the ones that end up being a case filing. But what we're trying to do is look at, do they open investigations and close them more quickly? Or do they open investigations and bring them to a case filing more quickly? So you can think about both those as being good things. That is, it might be a good thing to open an investigation quickly and then very quickly determine, is this a promising lead or not? So that's a new variable that we're working on. And then conditional on it being promising, actually getting it to the finish line more quickly. So those are 2 new variables that we're trying to work on defining right now. And if you actually look at some of the discussion, there was some discussion about this, which is we want the specialized units to be able to look into matters more quickly and determine, is there a fruitful path forward? And if not, close it immediately. And so we're trying to create that as some outcome variables that we'll hopefully have in a future version. Good question. All right, and if you were to look at it in parallel trends, see when the effects occur, they occur pretty shortly thereafter when it comes to investigation. So significant there in the first year after, and then maybe moderately significant in 2012. One of the things we know about investigation openings from prior research is the SEC can only have so many investigations opened at a time. They take about 2 years. So once they open a bunch, then it takes about a 2-year period before they're able to open some new ones. When we look at case filings, we see some similar trends. So we see a large increase for high SU areas, pretty flat for low SU, and then a large decrease for benchmark topics. Perhaps the decrease is too large. It's a very large decrease there, which we think indicates a pretty substantial shift in the nature of what the SEC is doing when it comes to actually filing cases in federal court. Now, one important thing to note here, and I'll discuss this a little bit later on, one of the reasons that you're seeing this trend in case filings downwards in the post period is because in 2010, which is the same time as the reorganization, the SEC also, or I guess I should say Congress, passed Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank gave the SEC more ability to bring court cases in their own specialized courts, their administrative courts. So less cases were filed in civil court, which is why it's important to do comparisons across groups here. What do we see in a regression framework? Parallel trends for case filing. So we do seem to see an increase in the post period, and it's a pretty persistent increase. So in 4 of the 5 post years, it's clearly above, with that last year right around above. So a natural question is, what's going on with the increase? And so one of the things that I think was actually related to a question earlier is perhaps you just have some geographic reorganization. Where you just shift cases from one location to another. That is, Fort Worth says, okay, I don't have an insider trading unit, so I'm going to shift my insider trading cases to Denver, which has an insider trading unit, and Denver has more SU staff. So by construction, all we're really picking up is shifting across geographic locations. But what we actually find in the data, and what I was showing earlier, is that we see an increase both in Denver, which has insider trading, so they might get 2 more cases. And we also see an increase in Fort Worth, which maybe doesn't have a lot of insider trading, so they might have an extra case. Where do these cases seem to come from? It seems to be a case from issuer reporting that is going to, having the decline. So it doesn't seem to be just shifting insider trading cases around. Rather, it seems like a shift from benchmark topics to these new areas with specialized units. Another potential explanation is that there is a change in case filings, but this change is some degree superficial. So the SEC is just trying to pad their stats by picking on some really easy cases. And so the Wall Street Journal has written articles about this before. I actually have some of my own work on a paper called the SEC September Spike, which looks at this. And so one possibility is the SEC just shifts for these specialized units to picking up relatively non-severe violations and bringing cases against them. That's not what we find. So we don't really find any evidence that cases are less complex, looking at the degree of criminal cases, violations, or Rule 10b-5 filing. So it doesn't seem to be that they're going after just easy cases to pad the stats. Finally, another potential explanation is that there's contemporaneous changes. So I'll discuss 2 in a fair amount of detail, cooperation program and Dodd-Frank, and that these are driving the effects. Now, our simple explanation for this would be we have geographic and topical variation in the creation of specialized units. Things like Dodd-Frank or the cooperation program were rolled out across all of the SEC, so they shouldn't be correlated with the way that we're measuring treatment in any way. That's a verbal explanation why it's not a concern. We also do some tests to provide comfort that these don't drive our results. So what do these tests look like? So I'll start with Dodd-Frank. So Dodd-Frank, which was 2010 as well, allowed the SEC to impose cease and desist orders and monetary penalties against non-regulated entities, persons, increasing the use of administrative proceedings. That is, you are the SEC, you can choose to file the case in civil court or in your own administrative court. Dodd-Frank made it easier to file it in your administrative report. For administrative proceedings, we don't know the SEC staff who are filing the case, so we can't map it to an office topic level. But what we can do is we can still do topic year rather than topic office year level. So we can't see the office, but we still know the topic and the year. So we can do office topic analysis. And what we see is a significant increase in all cases and no shift that's correlated with specialized topics. So here, substantial increase looking at all cases where we collapse our level of treatment just to be the topic year. So 5 years pre, 5 years post, 10 years, 8 topics gets you 80 observations. And you can see the coefficient estimates there are quite strong. So it doesn't seem to be that Dodd-Frank is driving it. So it's pretty clear that there's an increase in total case filings for specialized topics, whether you look at civil or administrative court. The next thing that you might be concerned about is a cooperation program. So this is Andy Leone et al. Paper 2021, published in Journal of Accounting and Economics. They look at the change in this 2010 cooperation program. And you might be concerned that the cooperation program was implemented in a way that is correlated with the creation of specialized units, but we find no evidence of that. So if we were to take cooperation, so cases when they are filed will state whether or not there was defendant cooperation. So if we take cases with cooperation and see does the degree of cooperation change with the creation of specialized units, we find no evidence of that with T-stats that are quite close to zero, especially when using that continuous measure. So it doesn't seem to be that the cooperation program is driving our results. Another way to address this concern is to drop any cases with cooperation. And again, we find the same thing. So this might raise the question of what drives the increase in case filing. So we're saying these specialized units led to more investigation openings and a lot more case filings. So what's driving this increase? And so one of the things we looked at is the SEC more likely to file the case as settled charges? So you could think about this as agreeing to settlement before filing it. So the SEC goes to the defendant and they say, here's the nature of the evidence against you. And the defendant says, okay, I will settle ahead of time, or I want this actually litigated in court and I want it to be decided in court. And what we find is these specialized units have a significant increase in the percentage of cases that are settled at filing, which we think is consistent with increased efficiency. That is, the defendant looks at the SEC, they say, you have a specialized unit that's dedicated to insider trading. These specialized unit experts are bringing this case against me. There's an increased chance that I'm going to lose this case, so I'm more likely to settle the case. And we certainly see a huge increase in settled at filing, which we interpret as increased efficiency. Why do we say increased efficiency? I'm always hesitant to use the word efficiency, but the reason we say increased efficiency is because if you actually file the case as settled charges, you're going to save a lot of time and effort on litigation. So you're not going to have to go through all that litigation. And the SEC itself actually will say that filing cases as settled charges is one of their goals because it frees up resources to pursue a number of other different areas. With that, the next thing we look at is sanctions. So our main tests focus on enforcement volume, which we would say is an observable and important performance measure for the SEC. So if you look at what the SEC reports to Congress, their key measure that they report is going to be the number of cases brought, but they also report on penalties. And if you were to think back to like an analytical model, so like Becker 1968 shows regulators have essentially 2 levers to deter misconduct. They can increase the probability of detection, but this is costly, or you can increase penalties. And our cases show that there's an increase in investigation openings, an increase in enforcement actions that are filed. We would say that these are consistent with an increased probability of detection and conviction. Of course, we don't know the true supply of underlying offenses, so it's impossible to say for sure, but we're also going to look at penalties. So is there a change in penalties? What do we mean by penalties? Most prior research uses financial penalties, so dollar fines. In talking to the SEC, they actually said that non-financial penalties are quite important, so bars and suspensions. Suppose you run a hedge fund or something like that. You care about getting fined. You also care a lot about having your license, so you're actually able to run your hedge fund because you get a lot of money from running that thing. And so bars and suspensions are also very meaningful non-financial penalties. So we're going to look at financial and non-financial penalties. what we'll see is an increase in the total amount of both financial and non-financial penalties, but no increase in average. So here I'm looking at aggregate dollar penalties, would be aggregate civil penalties, or aggregate bars and suspensions. Those will increase for areas with high specialized units, or using our continuous measure with a higher degree of specialization. But that's going to be driven completely by the increase in quantity we saw earlier. If you were to instead place this with averages, so look at the average penalty, we'll see essentially no change. So it's an increase in total penalties driven by an increase in quantity, not by an increase in the level of the average penalty. And the final thing that we'll look at is career outcomes. So a natural question is, okay, these specialized units seem to be good for the SEC as a whole, or at least they result in a substantial change in the nature of effort that was allocated. But does it actually benefit specialized unit staff themselves? That is, if you're assigned to a specialized unit, do you have better career outcomes? And the career outcome we're going to look at here is going to be promotion. And I think there's reasons that you could expect there to be better career outcomes or perhaps no change. So I think the argument or the rationale for seeing better career outcomes is a goal of the SUs was to allow staff to develop specialized expertise, to reward them. One way to reward staff is to have them have promotions, right? So if you work at a specialized unit, you're able to bring more cases, you're able to open more investigations, bring those investigations to resolution more quickly, so you're performing relatively well. You, in theory, should see an increased likelihood of promotion. On the other hand, as I talked all the way about on the hypothesis development slide, a stated goal of the reorganization was to avoid a two-tiered system where specialized staff were quote unquote special or better than the staff who remain generalist, because 75% of staff remain generalist. And if they have worse career outcomes, you might end up demotivating that 75% of your staff, which could actually lead to worse outcomes in the long run. So I think there's reasons to expect no change. What do we find? So we find pretty robust evidence that staff who are assigned to specialized units are more likely to get a promotion in the post-reorganization period, which suggests that these staff bring more cases and then they are in turn rewarded for them. Is this desirable or undesirable? You know, that's a normative question that we're not going to be able to answer. But once again, I think you can make arguments either way. So you could say, well, now these specialized staff are getting promoted faster, more quickly. Perhaps this is demoralizing to 75% of staff who aren't in specialized units, or perhaps it actually motivates those staff to try harder or to try to get into these specialized units. So I think you can make arguments or discussions either way. And so to wrap up, so what we find is that the reorganization shifted enforcement towards specialized unit-related violations and away from other violations, particularly issue reporting. So this was certainly a shift away from focusing on accounting-related issues. And we think this allows for contributions to the literature on SEC investigations and enforcement actions, the importance of director priorities. So this is a law review article by Cox and Thomas in 2019. And what they say is, you know, the directors of the 5 major units at the SEC are quite important, yet very, very heavily understudied. And when they implement one of their priorities, it could have huge effects on the enforcement that we see, but this is not really studied at all. Well, we're able to identify a specific leader, so Robert Kuzmazi, Director of Enforcement, and look at his key priority, which is the creation of specialized units in the 2010 reorganization. And we could show this had a very substantial change on enforcement. And finally, this is a finding of practical importance to the SEC as they consider creating new specialized units or changing the scope of existing specialized units. So for those who are interested in, say, crypto, the SEC, or cyber crimes, the SEC has recently created specialized units that are actually focused on crypto and cyber issues. And so it's something that they continue to expand. And so this might be of potential importance, suggesting once they create those specialized units, you're likely to see some type of an effect there, because we have seen that in the past. And so with that, that's all I have right now. I'll open it up to any questions that people might have.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Matt, for your contribution and for your effort. It's really an excellent presentation and excellent paper. Now, if anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question. Yes,
Hi,
Tom.
Matt. Yeah, I have a question, but I haven't read the paper yet. Maybe it's already in the paper. It's just I wonder, like for those staff, are they like one person in the team, or like they have multiple people, like just they do for the common letter?
So on any given investigation, we can't necessarily see everyone who is assigned to the investigation. So we don't know exactly which people are assigned or not. Now, I will observe that almost, I think, speaking off the top of my head here without having the data in mind, almost every office that has one specialized unit person in an area has more than one. That is, it seems to be like there was some degree of clustering. So it's not like you're going to create a specialized unit in San Francisco for insider trading and assign just one person. You're likely to have either 0 or say 4 or 5. So it does seem to be the case that they try to assign a couple people to these specialized units. Once again, contingent on the fact that offices have some size constraint. But I do think on these investigations, they do have some ability to work in groups. One of the things that happens in the post-reorganization period, so in like 2010, 11 onwards, is the SEC puts out press releases where they actually say, here's a case filing that we brought. Here's everyone that actually worked on the investigation that led to that case filing. That ends up being pretty nice because then you can see it is a team of people. So it's a village, not just one person. And they'll often have 5, 8 different people that they'll thank at the SEC who brought it to that level. Unfortunately, we're unable to use that data in this project because it's all just in the post period. So we can't test for a shift of like, okay, in the pre-period, did you just have like 3 people in one geography, and in the post period, you have 3 people in different geographies or something. So we can't quite do that test, although we'd like to.
Oh, I see. But I noticed you use like a promotion and like a pay grade, so it's not individual level.
Oh, in the career outcomes slide.
Yeah,
This is at the individual level. Yeah.
individual. Oh,
Yeah. So we know. So, but yeah. So this is at the individual level. And so we have some variables like what was the nature of the law school you went to, what pay grade are you at? So promotions get harder the higher up you get, which is why the coefficient on pay grade's negative, which makes sense, right? It's easier to get promoted in an accounting firm from associate to senior associate than it is from managing director to partner. So I think that coefficient makes sense. New hires get promoted a little bit quicker. Once again, negative coefficient on tenure makes sense. After a while, there's only so many promotions you can get. And then specialized units suggest those people in specialized units are more likely to get promoted. Yeah, because we can identify at a person level who it is.
oh, okay. Yeah, I just thought it would be interesting to look at like a average number of people in the team.
Yeah, we could possibly do something like that.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Are there other questions? If anyone have any questions, please open your mic and ask your question. Thank you very much, dear Professor Matt, for your contribution and your effort. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone joining us today, and thank you for taking the time to present to us, dear Professor Matt. It's been really appreciated.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining and for your helpful comments and feedback. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I hope to see you soon in Egypt. You are very, very welcome.
Thank you.